Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
This concluding lecture will be about digital media technologies and how anthropology approaches them as a form of popular culture. So, traditionally what anthropology has usually done till now, tradition is not the correct word actually to use here, but largely anthropological research has meant that anthropologists will go to one place or more than one place, stay there, talk to people, interview them, conduct surveys, do what is called participant observation, write field notes, and then analyze that information and then present their research. When it comes to social media, digital media or social network sites, SNS as they are known, the problem facing an anthropologist is, where is the field site here? How do you locate it? How do you reach the people who are members of this field site? Let us say Facebook is a field site. How does one go about contacting these people, and how do we know that they are quote unquote real? What if their identity is quote fake, as the word is more often used these days with regard to social network sites? So, here the question is, what is fake? What does fake mean? What does it mean to say that a human being who also is operating as another person or in another identity on a social networking site actually has a fake identity? So, there is some distinction being made between real and fake identity, which of course becomes something to think about for an anthropologist doing research on these sites, because then we have to figure out who are these people, what are they doing there, why are they doing what they are doing. But also first we have to recognize that these field sites that are online are as much a field site as is any geographical, physical field site we would go to. But so this problem of how to study the digital has been slowly getting resolved in anthropology more recently through a number of studies on various social media platforms. So one of the most famous scholars who has worked on this is Professor Daniel Miller from University College London, who has written widely on these topics and has edited a volume called Digital Anthropology and a book called Facebook, and has monitored, has been the major researcher on a huge project which has looked at the use of social media across the world. Another scholar who comes to mind very easily is Tom Boelsdorf, anthropologist in America, who has also looked at a virtual site and conducted an ethnographic study. And there are other scholars like Sirpa Tenhoden, who is in Finland, Ilana Gershon, who is in United States, and in India we have scholars like Nimi Rangaswamy and Sriram Venkatraman, who also conducted studies on the use of social media from an anthropological perspective. These are just a few names that I am mentioning here. There are many more. So, in today's lecture we will briefly look at these scholars' research work. But what is the question that these works are raising? One is, how virtual is the virtual world. What do we mean by virtual? What is not virtual? We mean the real, virtual versus real. And then we have to define these two worlds. What is a real world and what is a virtual world? What is in this virtual world that does not lend itself to be real? And what is it that we do in the real world that cannot be classified as virtual? So, offline versus online. So, we have to define that. Then comes the methodology, an issue that I already mentioned to you, which is a very significant aspect actually, if you think about it. How does one go about locating informants when you cannot see them? You may be able to meet them, you may never be able to meet them at all except on these sites. Then how does one go about collecting information? And what about anonymity, authenticity, the same issues which we have seen before in discussions about music or any other form of popular culture occur here as well. And one more question which a lot of these issues research studies address is also whether people participate in social network sites because they provide them an escape from reality, like cinema did. A lot of people say that about cinema, that somehow if you are on a social networking site spending time talking to people on that site, that is because you don't want to be in this physical real world. This is one assumption, so we have to find out whether that assumption rings true through ethnographic research. If it is not an escape, if it is not something that people are going to just to forget their real world, then can we then make an argument that these sites are in addition to or just another form of a real world created elsewhere, just like an alternate form, and it is not necessarily some kind of fictional universe into which people go in and come out. And the bigger question for all social scientists, including anthropologists, would be, what can we tell about human behavior and attitude and culture from looking at what people are doing and how they are engaging with social network sites? The objective of anthropology, or for that matter any social science, is to understand human behavior. So, a lot of people are now engaging with these sites, right? So, in that case, by looking at these sites, what can we understand and what can that inform us that we would otherwise miss by not looking at these sites? If things have changed, if cultures have changed or are undergoing transformation, can that transformation be captured by looking at social network sites? And following that, the question would be then, can we look at this site itself as a form of culture? Is there some kind of shared values and notions and beliefs and practices that members of one group follow, which everyone then has to understand, which then lends itself to be seen like any other culture, society that an anthropologist would look at. So, these are largely the kind of questions that have occupied anthropologists who have been looking at these sites for a long time. So, nowadays we hear often people saying that social network sites like Facebook, for example, have too much impact on our lives, that especially when it comes to young people, the assumption seems to be that they are spending more time on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, rather than with family or with friends, doing things. So how much impact does it really have? Or these kind of assumptions that some of these sites are not very encouraging for engagement, just some kind of imagination, some kind of paranoia. Are we worrying too much when we say that certain activities are not healthy? So we constantly hear about engagement with social media sites, along with discussions about mental health, or words like depression and all. They are just thrown about and used in very casual way. What we can do as anthropologists is to find out whether this is the case, and if not, or even if so, why and how do people get into these? What is in it for people to be engaged so actively? We will start with Tom Belstoff's study. So Tom Belstoff looked at one online page called Second Life. So you can go to Second Life and you can get a membership and become whatever you want to be. There are lots of identities there. These identities are called avatars. So you can choose what avatar you want to be, and this avatar can be either related to you or can be something that a person wants to be but is not, or is not to his or her own immediate circle of people around. So this kind of site is what he studied. So he became a member, he followed a lot of these people, and then some of the conclusions that he arrives at, Dr. Belstoff, after a very thorough study, is that most of the times people are very amiable. There is some kind of community that is being formed on Second Life. Sometimes there are unpleasant behaviors, but usually what happens is this Second Life can provide a kind of a community for people, and thus can create a kind of culture which in itself is worth studying than just focusing on quote unquote geographically, physically real cultures. So the main argument here is that virtual is real too. It is as much real for those people who are participating in this world with another identity, because that identity matters to them as much as the given existing officially accepted identity, and therefore it deserves attention. That is the argument. A similar study done by Dr. Ilana Gershon in US amongst college students is very revealing in what it says about Facebook users. Very surprisingly, now most people will tell us that today's young people are not paying any attention to what anybody is telling them. They are always on Facebook, or more particularly in India, one would say they are always on WhatsApp, all the time WhatsApping their friends and not paying attention to teachers in the classroom, not paying attention to parents at home, etc., etc. A Gershon study in America amongst college students said that actually it is really not so simplistic. Students who were on Facebook found that it was actually proving to be a huge disruption in their lives. So if they wanted to have a very smooth sailing life, they felt that they had to leave Facebook. So contrary to what is being assumed, that people embrace social network sites as form of escape, or to create identities and be engaged with people online rather than be engaged with other humans offline. What her study shows is that Facebook is seen as a rather threatening and disruptive form of communication. It is not as simple as being accepted as the form of communication for young people. And what students told her and what she concludes is, to quote, students are young people feel that they are being turned into somewhat very anxious, quote, anxious, jealous and monitoring cells, unquote. What does that mean? The people that she spoke to, the young people she spoke to, told her that they felt that they were becoming more anxious about their lives, their relationships, their intimacy with other people, and that made them jealous or worrying, or in a way transformed them into some other people that they were not, constantly checking on others. And this she calls the neoliberal self. So just to give you a few quotes from her work and to paraphrase those points. So in one place she quotes a student who talks about how most people he did not know just wished him a birthday on Facebook. And the student felt very silly about it, because you have some 300 friends and you actually have not met more than 200 of them, and yet all of them wish you happy birthday because Facebook tells them today is so and so's birthday. And you know that too, that this person is wishing you because this person has been alerted by somebody, and that somebody is Facebook. Do you really want to be friends with people who actually do not remember your birthday but send you greetings because Facebook reminded them? So this was a question raised by one of the informants, and what this person actually did was removed that birthday thing. So you basically don't give any date. So then you're only wished by people who actually know your birthday, because they remember anyway, and not because they are waiting for a social media site to remind them about your birthday. The other thing that the students introspected actually was also the number of friends. There is these kind of social media platforms, and it is not just Facebook. So before Facebook there have been others. So all of them have the same kind of idea to enable, network more and more people together, like-minded people hopefully. But the larger imperative there then is to acquire more and more friends. But one person pointed out that it came to a point where this person was beginning to worry very much when the number of friends reduced. So suppose we have like 400 friends, or in this quote this person said, at the moment he has 399 friends, but suppose the next morning he sees that the 399 has come down to 393. What does that mean? That means 6 people removed him from their friendship list. Now imagine actually being told, or you can see that some people have actually removed you from their friendship list. What would that do to us? How will we even understand this process? So these are young people introspecting on actually, what is going on here? Why should we even be at this point where we have some 400 friends, and if 5 friends unfriended us, we would go into a great depression. And another informant mentions to Ilana Gershon that At the time of job interviews, it seems prospective employers ask people, can we see your Facebook profile? We want to know, who you are talking to, how you are communicating and all that. But essentially what that means is also that they want to see what kinds of things you say, what kind of things you tag or you're being tagged, and you're quoting, uploading. And obviously that is not very comfortable situation. So, these kind of scenarios which one would never think about occur. And then that makes them very much concerned about what are they actually doing on this social platform. Another issue is updating the profile picture, constant updation. If you have not updated over a long period of time, then you're kind of left behind, because everyone else is updating their Facebook profile or whatever social media profile very often. And it is not just that you have to update your profile, you also have to update with very good pictures. These should not be some low quality, low resolution pictures taken without any understanding of angle or light or perspective. These should be perfect photographs, wherein one gets appreciation for not just how you look but how the photo was taken. And this is a lot of pressure. And some people actually admitted to her that they were really not very popular in their college, but on the Facebook profile they were very popular. So completely two different personalities in two different spaces, and so this person actually wondered, why am I popular? I'm really not someone who hangs out with people. Why are people liking me so much on this platform? And that's because of what is being said and how it's being said. It is not necessarily whether you are hanging out with this person at all. And later Gershon also talks about, gives a very detailed example of one case where a student was emotionally involved with another student, and then they were just checking this person's Facebook profile when when they were traveling, and then they found out that that person is in some public place with another person, and then that causes a lot of anxiety. And the person who told this to Gershon actually starts wondering, what am I doing here? Why am I stalking my partner? A person with whom you have a relationship, you start becoming very suspicious because of some photograph you saw on his or her profile. And this caused so much anxiety that the person actually decided to leave that social media platform. So lots of such examples are given in this study, but basically what these social network sites are also doing is, in creating these intimacies, a lot of negotiations are going on. People are checking out not just appearance but also taste, what books are these person reading, what movies are they watching, where are they eating, who are they hanging out with. All this information is being constantly monitored, evaluated and assessed. And these media platforms also become some kind of evidence producing sites. So people will come back and say, you told me you're going to be at home studying, but then I saw on Facebook that you were yesterday having dinner at this other place. So it becomes very problematic, So in fact, one question that she actually poses or a point she raises is actually that it's not enough that you communicate through a social media platform. You also have to communicate outside of the social media platform in order to clear a lot of issues and problems that arise by communicating in that platform in the first place. So this is where the people, her informants, started telling her that they felt that they were becoming completely different persons, different selves, a different kind of selfhood was being created because of this technology and what it allowed you to do. and what it actually eventually made you to do. Very suspicious, very jealous kind of persons, and which is why it becomes hugely problematic later on. However, we do know that in spite of all of this, the number of social media users have only been increasing and increasing, and India is one of those places where the numbers have been very high actually, and it has just skyrocketed in a very short period of time. You know, we have to now find out actually how come and in what ways are all these people being engaged in these platforms. Are we becoming more lonely maybe as individuals? Is there a lot of boredom in spite of all the things that are available? Does it actually show evidence of more alienation rather than more coming together? Is this indicative of some larger social problem that we are missing, that so many people are engaged in social network sites rather than with each other? So these are all the questions that come, and of course one of the best ways in which we can find answer to these kind of questions is through long time ethnographic studies, and that is precisely what a group of people at University College London under the leadership of Professor Daniel Miller have done. So they have conducted a study called Why We Post: Social Media Through the Eyes of the World, and this group consisted of Professor Miller and several other people who were looking at the use of social media across the world in India, China, Italy, UK, Trinidad, Brazil, Chile, I don't think Brazil was there, Chile, and all these other countries. And all of their publications are now available for free online. And what do these studies tell us? So one of the objectives of the study was also to find out exactly why people are engaging with these sites. And what do we know from this huge research which went on over 5 years? We know that social media does not necessarily make people individualistic. So in the UCL website you can actually see that they call this as discoveries. So about 15 points are mentioned as discoveries, and one discovery number 1 is that it doesn't necessarily make everyone become very self-centered or individualistic. Actually what social network media sites actually do is to keep people in touch with others. They don't become individually isolated creatures. For example, keeping in touch with family through social media. The other point is that the concern amongst parents particularly, that children watching YouTube means that children are paying less attention to what is being told in school, is not borne out in this research. Research shows that YouTube is also like a school. People are accessing these sites not only to watch movies but also to learn a lot about many things. We have a number of videos on YouTube teaching us many things, teaching on subject material as well, and young people are accessing it to learn more. It is not just a frivolous activity. Of course, selfie has become now such an important thing to do when one gets together with a group of people. But what this studies also shows is that there are various genres of selfie. Apparently, photos which show only the feet are called footy. There is the groupie, which means a photograph with yourself and a group of people. Apparently there are also some photos which are classified as uglies because people aren't dressed properly in order to take the photos. So while we assume that there is just a selfie, there are many lees under this selfie as well. So because people categorize and people decide which one falls in which category. While social access to digital media and access to social network sites is available for everyone in principle, in reality it does not necessarily remove the divisions, the social divisions that exist. So just because people are all together on Facebook doesn't mean that there are no class divisions or divisions due to caste or race or gender in otherwise operating in their lives. These divisions do exist. So to assume that somehow social network sites will bring through some kind of equality may be a little far-fetched, and it doesn't look like engagement with these sites removes inequalities necessarily. There is also significant amount of agency and people move from platform to platform. They have no hesitation in dropping the platform they were using for a long period of time and just jumping into another platform just because that looks better or easier or cheaper to operate or whatever. So at the end of the day, the people who have come up with this platform have less power in some sense than the people who actually use these platforms. Another assumption also, just like how people think that technology or social media technologies particularly can remove all kinds of hierarchical divisions, it is also not fully correct to assume that these kind of media platforms can provide space for only resistance or challenging the norms. Not really. A lot of times, a lot of videos which are circulating on WhatsApp or a lot of memes that are put up, they are all rather a confirmation of people's faith and beliefs in what one would label as traditional stuff rather than necessarily challenging. So ultimately people decide what they want to use it for. So it can be videos about some mind-boggling research. It can be a video about some NGO work that has been done in an area. It can also be a video about some faith-based material. So social media largely serves to conform to tradition rather than challenge it. One reason why this might be also is because there is a lot of surveillance on these sites. So if you have WhatsApp, pretty much everyone in your family is on WhatsApp too, and therefore what you can say and how you can say is a bit constrained, even more so on Facebook as well. So while these platforms allow us to express what we think, they are also platforms on which a lot of people are there who are also watching what is being said. So that can also cause some kind of hesitation. Another reason also is that it can invite rude or violent remarks from others, and that is also a reason why people hesitate to talk a lot sometimes. The majority of people that the UCL group studied felt that it may not be very wise to be saying everything on social media. Another aspect that comes out very clearly in the study of social media is the importance of visuals. So, photographs, how you appear, the colors, all these things make a huge difference to how it is appreciated. But precisely because there is less text, there is requirement of less text in these social media sites, it in some ways becomes an equalizer for people who cannot read. There are a lot of people who are not literate in India and in many other places, and for them this becomes a very easy tool to navigate, because it only requires pictures. It does not necessarily ask for you to be able to read and respond, although a little bit of reading might be enough. The problem with emphasis on visuals is that there is a lot of pressure to look good, especially with young women, particularly in Italy. For example, this research found that women felt that pressure more than in other places. Men also, younger men. So, a lot of times they post pictures from the gym, for example, because they feel that those pictures will be appreciated more. The social network platforms also do not necessarily create a homogeneous world where everyone looks like everybody else. That is not the case. These media platforms allow for celebration of difference. So, in fact, people come to know more about their cultures and practices due to these pages, Facebook pages and other Instagram and other sites that are available to them. So, it does not mean while everybody is engaging in the same platform, they are also celebrating difference. For e-commerce, it is believed that participation in social media platforms will be very beneficial. What this study found is that it is very beneficial for small businesses where person to person kind of knowing and familiarity is more important. It does not necessarily make a difference for big businesses whether they are present on these social network platforms or not. So, smaller enterprises which are run by women particularly, which does not require a lot of capital, they are the ones which also find more followers or admirers on these platforms. So, in some parts of Chile, for example, where there were no shops where people could buy things, these kind of small businesses which are available on social media network fill that gap. So, that way small businesses can find these platforms extremely useful. In another way also, these platforms are very useful in that after any big natural catastrophe, messages come flooding onto the internet. The researcher in Chile talks about how after an earthquake in Chile, people got together, were posting pictures on Instagram so that others could see and then take action. One is also reminded of similar activities that happened on Twitter, for example, and on Facebook during the recent floods in the city of Chennai or Kerala. So, the social media platforms are used to gather resources, to galvanize people, to point out exactly where the state agencies need to go for rescue efforts, and that way they play a very major role. So, here the public and the private become fused almost. I mean, people are not so much concerned about privacy as much as they are about getting people together and getting the task done. So, now going back to this criticism about young people being on social media all the time, they do not see their time spent on social media as different from what they will do in their physical world. They see their time on social media just as an extension of what they are doing in the physical world. So, you at home you talk to parents, in college you talk to your classmates, and on Facebook you talk to whoever it is that you're talking to. So, this is not, there isn't a boundary in their minds about these two different worlds, and that has to be understood, and we have to look at social media as a meaningful way of communication, not as something of a threat or as an aberration to socializing. It is also one way of socializing. That is how we have to understand it. Another discovery that the UCL term talks about is that gender stereotypes are challenged but also reinforced on social media platforms. So, for instance, in China, apparently, men will appear in a more softer and a more sensitive manner on social media platforms, but not when they are in their physical worlds. So, one space allows for that to happen, which will not be appreciated in another space. Like I said before, there is also a lot of pressure on women to look good, and in some ways the assumption that a woman has to be of this appearance in order to be called beautiful or whatever is confirmed on social media sites. It's not necessarily challenged on these sites. One more point that this research makes, and I think it's a very important point, is about polymedia. So, what do they mean by polymedia? What the authors are saying is that people are engaging with multiple media forms at pretty much simultaneous times. So, therefore, if you are looking at Facebook, for example, there is no point in only looking at Facebook to the exclusion of other media forms in which the people may be engaged. These are the same people, nearly the same people who are engaged with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and something else. So they are these platforms all are kind of similar for places for expression for those who are engaged with them, and if we need to understand what is going on, we have to look at them as a whole, or as polymedia, as the scholars call it. Another discovery is about memes and about how important memes have become, because memes allow people to say things that otherwise they would not be comfortable saying, and at the same time they can say it through somebody else. So there is this frog figure which has become very famous, but basically that frog is voicing what people are thinking. And also there is a lot of humor involved in these memes. So it allows for the issue to be discussed without inviting too much backlash. There is also sarcasm in a lot of memes, but memes are very important modes of communication. And then social media and privacy is the last discovery that they talk about, and social media can ask for or create space for privacy, particularly in places where it is hard to get privacy. So if people are living in large families settings, then social media provides them an opportunity to go away and be in a separate place and talk to someone else. But this does not, privacy is also not a notion common across cultures. So we have to, when we talk about privacy, we also have to locate it in that particular context and ask, what does privacy mean here? How do people understand privacy? Different stakeholders. So the person who is using a social media platform might want to be alone, but the people around this person may not think that it's a good idea. So we have to kind of deconstruct these large terms like privacy, right to privacy, and then explore it a little more before we can say something. In fact, this team at UCL has now engaged, not all of them, but Professor Miller and a few others are engaged in looking at the role of social media in discussions about health. So health and aging is something they are looking at, particularly through the use of smartphones. They are looking at this research in Brazil and Africa and other countries. So we need more such research in India to understand what activity people are engaged in. I will now move to the use of mobile phones. Okay, we have looked at social media platforms. Now I am going to look at mobile phones, and here I would like to discuss the work by Professor Sirpa Tenhunen of Finland, who is an anthropologist and who has worked on in India for a long time, and she has looked at the use of what are called as ICTs, information and communication technology. There is a concept called ICTD, information and communication technology for development. So usually these are the areas where so far people have been looking at mobile phone usage, but lately we are getting some anthropological perspective as well, and Tenhunen's work throws light on what happens when a village in a rural part of India gets access to mobile phones. How does it transform their everyday relationships? So she looks at West Bengal, and she has been studying this state from the 1990s onwards, and she looked at first the arrival of landline phones in what is called an STD booth, but usually there isn't a separate booth. These landline phones are just put up in a few shops, and then the people of the village start using that phone as a place to receive and send messages to other people. But soon it got replaced, or the village moved to mobile phones. But look at the rapid spread of technology. In 2003, in that village where Tenhunen studied, there were 3 phones. In 2007, there were 100 phones. So in just 4 years, the number of mobile phones that people had access to had increased. So one can only imagine what it must be like now in 2019. She discusses her findings in the book A Village Goes Mobile. There is tremendous increase in phone density in this rural area. And what she did very interestingly was she recorded these phone conversations so that she can then follow what exactly is happening. So in her article, she gives transcripts of a lot of these conversations. So what exactly has happened? How did relationships change? One thing that happened is before the coming of mobile phones and landline phones, the technologies that people were familiar with in this village were radio and television. But radio and television is not going to give you news about your relatives or what's going on in the next village, right? They give information about the larger world. But now with landline phone and mobile phone, what is happening is people are able to quickly transmit and get information about what is going on in nearby areas and also tell somebody what's going on in their lives. For example, marriage. In fact, one thing she found is that a lot of marriages were being planned and arranged through the mobile phones, Women particularly were able to take part in decision making, where previously they would have only received information after everything had been fixed. Now they are present when the conversations are going on and are therefore able to give their input. And for women particularly, the mobile phone allows them to be in close touch with their natal family. Whereas previously it would have taken a long time for the natal family to know if there is any problem in their in-laws house. Now the women can immediately pass on the information and get help if required, or participate in some family engagements and family rituals because of the mobile phones. And also phones enable people to improve their businesses and also prevent travel, but also participate with their relatives in different ways. Of course, Professor Tenhunen's research was done in 2000, before 2010. Now with smartphones being available in India, one will have to think about how that might transform. I mean, how does smartphone transform what are the possibilities that one can have? So in the UCL study, for example, we come to know that people now, if a relative is ill and they cannot visit this person, they can at least see this person. If some relative is giving birth and you can't go because that village is very far away, you can at least see them on video and you can wish them. Of course, for diasporic networks, populations, the smartphone with the third generation technology has become very, very crucial because of the possibilities of video calls. So these would have accelerated in some sense the relationships that already exist. They now enable so many more possibilities, and that is what we see in Tenhunen's study. A similar study about mobile phone usage was done as part of the UCL team by Sriram Venkatraman on the outskirts of Chennai, and there what we find very interestingly is that while young boys and young men got mobile phones very easily, girls were not given mobile phones till they got married, because it was assumed that if a girl is given a mobile phone, she will then start engaging with other men in activities which the families did not want to deal with. But after marriage, they have no hesitation in giving their daughters mobile phones so that the daughters can keep them informed about the goings on in their final household or the household into which they marry. It's very similar to Tenhunen's study. And the last study on mobile phones that I am going to discuss here is by Professor Nimi Rangaswamy and Payal Arora, and this research was done in Hyderabad and Chennai among men living in a lower economic income group, in a lower economic neighborhood, and one of the main points that comes through in this study as well as in Dr. Sriram Venkatraman's study is about the kinds of new intimacies that are made possible between men and women through mobile phones, and through mobile phones young people accessing internet. So that aspect is very much foregrounded in how they interact with this technology, particularly for young people. Some of them see these sites as just entertainment, particularly Facebook, but for some others these are also places which open up to them the whole world for them to connect. So that again provides huge possibilities for them. So in conclusion, what do we understand? We can clearly see that digital media technologies provide a huge platform for anthropologists to engage with, because they are almost a kind of culture. And these are also significantly impacting people's behavior and attitude, from things like food and dress to their attitudes to marriage, romance and sexuality. There is also threat of violence either through trolling or through stalking, and that can lead to uncomfortable situations. We also need to see ethnographically how this plays out. And the last aspect is the role of the state as the intermediary in determining how and in what ways can people engage or not engage with others through social media sites. Thank you.